Algae. Now, one of the greatest environmental tragedies of recent times was the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Oil leaked into the pristine, crystal clear waters of the Gulf at an incredible rate of over 2 million gallons per day. The result was an environmental wasteland, a lifeless and desolate stretch of sludge and muck that extends the entire length of the coastline from Louisiana to Florida. The BP leak killed nearly all the seabirds in the region, destroyed the fisheries, rendered the beaches hazardous and unusable, and took a once vibrant and bustling region of the South and turned it almost overnight into an empty ghost town. Oh, wait a minute. That's not what happened at all, is it? Now, that's what the environmental liberals said was going to happen, what they imagined could occur. And thanks to the hysterical drama types in the media, that's what we all thought as the oil cascaded into the Gulf. That's what CNN's Anderson Cooper staked his entire show on. For week upon endless week, a breathless Anderson Cooper aired his nightly broadcast from New Orleans from the Gulf Coast. And not because Anderson Cooper cares one bit about the people in that region. He only visits the region when there's something in it for Anderson Cooper. Those people who make their living on the rigs in the Gulf of Mexico, those people who fish the waters, the people who run the restaurants and hotels from Biloxi to the Florida Panhandle, they're not Anderson Cooper's kind of people. He wouldn't be caught dead vacationing in Panama City or the Gulf shores if his life depended on it. He's more of a Martha's Vineyard, Southampton, South Beach kind of guy, or maybe Venice Beach. But for weeks on end, there was Anderson Cooper every night on the Gulf Coast, eviscerating BP, rooting for the oil to wash up on the shores and ruin the place. That's right, Anderson Cooper was literally rooting for the oil. Indeed, he was so invested in a bad outcome for BP and a good outcome for himself, a Peabody Award, maybe an Emmy, that what he was actually rooting against was the home team. He was rooting against the people he pretended to care about. He was hoping against hope that the BP spill would be the worst ecological disaster in world history. He was yearning for those oil-soaked spots on the beaches to spread and multiply, for the birds and the fish to start washing up on shore along with the toxic sludge. When that story didn't pan out, he had to be disappointed. When the carnage didn't come, he must have been down and depressed. 2 years later, here is what we know. And not because Anderson Cooper did some extensive follow-up reporting. The Gulf Coast is vibrant and bustling. The beaches are clean. The water is clear. Families still vacation there, especially on the beautiful barrier islands off the Mississippi coast. The fish are back, the shellfish too. So, what happened, Anderson? Where was this enviro-apocalypse you promised? Well, as it turned out, crude oil leaks into the Gulf waters pretty much all the time. It's a natural result of having so much oil under the surface of the seafloor that it seeps out. That's sort of the thing about oil in the Gulf. There's so much oil under the ground, it wants out naturally, which is why BP and other oil companies are there in the first place. The result of this entirely natural occurrence is the Gulf has a natural mechanism to absorb and disperse huge quantities of crude oil, salt water, and algae. The salt water disperses the oil clouds, and then the algae feast on them. Nifty handiwork by a power much higher than the EPA. So, 2 years later, the worst environmental disaster ever, and the oily wasteland never really happened. 2 years later, it's almost hard to find any sign of the oil leak in the region unless you count the billions and billions of dollars poured into the area by a remorseful BP. And what was the reason? Armies of environmentalists and college kids combing the beaches with paper towels and sponges, skimmers and equipment battling the oil sludge? No, it was salt water and algae. So why the hyper-dramatics, Anderson? Why the tears and wails and gnashing of teeth? Why is it that every time some oil spills, we're treated to a melodrama of overacting from the environmental left? As the oil spilled into the Gulf, it was like one of those scenes from the Arab streets with the women in the burqas making that noise. La, 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 la. I mean, that's what environmentalists sound like. Every time somebody spills something, you know? Why do they do it? Why do they react? Power. It's all about the power. Because if you want to increase your power, the first thing you need is a really fat crisis. You need to scare everybody into thinking that this is really it. The Gulf of Mexico is going to be a dead zone. We've only got 3 years left to drive our cars. That the earth is turning into a sauna or an ice cube. Take your pick. They never seem to know which. Only then can you pass more laws, issue more regulations, get more up into everybody's life, and business. For liberals, there's only one solution to every problem. There's only one way to clean up an oil spill or solve an energy crisis: give them more power, which is why they absolutely hate God's algae. Because the algae doesn't want any power. It just wants to eat the oil.